Over the weekend, Donald Trump told a story he regularly does about how he pressured NATO members to contribute their fair share to the alliance.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Boast misunderstands how NATO is funded. Most of its funding doesn't involve paying bills. Member nations commit to a target of at least 2% of their GDP to defense spending. 11 NATO members have surpassed that, including all 5 that share a border with Russia. NATO's supporters say mistakenly portraying members as cheapskates sows doubt about America's commitment to the collective defense pact, where an attack on one is an attack on all. But Trump has repeatedly gotten that wrong since before he was president. It was the easy way he encouraged Russia to attack that has shocked NATO members. Boasting about it now is perceived as giving a green light to Vladimir Putin should Trump become president. Putin is 2 years into his invasion of Ukraine and boasts about expanding Russia into NATO countries. Our Caitlin Huey-Burns asked Trump's opponent in the 2024 race about the comments.
I had to sit down with him and say he had to stop the bromance that was happening with Putin and Russia. I saw the press conference the two of them had. I said, this is not right. This is not normal. And you look at the situation, the idea that he would side with Putin, a man who kills his opponents, a man who is holding Evan Gersovich prisoner right now just for doing his journalistic job, a man who has never been shy about saying he wants to defeat America. And you're going to choose him over an ally that was with us after 9/11?
CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now. Caitlin, how much has these NATO comments seeped into what voters are talking about there? Are they paying attention at all to the attacks between Haley and Trump?
Well, John, not quite. And this is interesting because South Carolina is a heavy military state. And that's why Nikki Haley is really leaning into this and has kind of made this a big part of her pitch to voters today on this tour. But what we see in our polling, and this is echoed by voters we've been talking to on the campaign trail here, is that they much more think of this as a national race. Our polling shows a 35-point lead for Donald Trump here. And when you kind of look deep into the polling, people seem more concerned about national issues. Republican primary voters in our poll give Trump a higher approval rating as president than Nikki Haley as governor. So there is a uphill climb for her here, but she's really hoping to kind of tap into people who are, maybe inclined to support someone else. Early voting started today here in South Carolina, so that's a big part of Haley's pitch. But when you talk to supporters of hers, they're looking to turn the page. But when you talk to supporters of the former president, they say that they believe he did a good job as president and want to see it again.
Haley may have lived there, but those poll numbers make it look like it's Donald Trump's home state. Caitlin Huey-Burns in Columbia, South Carolina. Thank you. Now let's go to CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett. Major, it's good to be with you as always. You've heard this boast from former President Trump for a long time. How did you interpret these new comments?
So it's not a new story, as you mentioned, John. Former President Trump talks about his relationship to NATO members and how much they set aside for defense spending. You mentioned that 2% threshold. That's a goal. When President Trump took office in 2017, 4 members of NATO met that 2% threshold. When he left office, 9 members did. So he's correct to say some of that jawboning that he did publicly over and over again probably enticed NATO members to set aside more for collective defense, theirs and within the alliance, but also concerns then and during the Trump presidency about Russia. And as you mentioned, 11 members do now. So that has continued in the Biden presidency. It's not as if European members are saying, well, we're less concerned about Russia now. We're not going to set aside as much. They're setting aside as much, if not more, in terms of numbers of NATO membership. So what is most alarming in European capitals to what the former president said over this weekend is amplifying that do what the hell ever you want part.
Right.
Because they know that Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, is listening to that. And they also know in many European capitals that former President Trump has said if he's reelected, he'll solve the Ukraine war in a day or two. And everyone knows, or at least they think they know what that means. Siding with Russia, creating a de facto Russian leadership or governance of some part of Ukraine and forcing Ukraine to sue for peace on terms it currently does not find acceptable. That is something that every European capital worries about in the NATO context and for the future of Ukraine and whatever other territorial ambitions Putin may have.
Major, we're back into the linguistic area of Trump's statements because Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, pardon me, told Jake Tapper on CNN, people just don't understand how Donald Trump talks. He's fully in support of NATO. He's not going to let anything happen with Russia. It's just people misunderstanding. And Rubio expressed some irritation that people misunderstood Donald Trump. Help us think that through.
So look, John, I was privileged to cover many U.S. presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and President Trump. And I've been to many NATO summits. And during that time before Trump was president, there was a kind of wandering that NATO went through. What was its real mission? What was it really about? And did former President Trump, when he was in office, sort of spark a more intense conversation and sort of suggest the U.S. was keeping tabs in ways that it hadn't before? Yes, he did. The simple truth is that it was Defense Secretary Robert Gates under former President Obama who most directly put this conversation in motion in NATO circles, saying you better pony up on defense spending, otherwise the alliance will not be nearly as strong as it needs to be. But that's not what Trump supporters hear, John. What Trump supporters hear is the American president, or the American president-to-be in their minds, rattles the cages of Europe and makes them do what they otherwise wouldn't do, and that helps America. And they feel better about that. And in that particular shorthand Trump linguistic approach, they find not only comfort, but reason to continue to rally to his defense. And that's not just true among Trump supporters. It's also true among Trump supportive lawmakers like Marco Rubio.
Give us your sense of South Carolina. The CBS poll has Haley trailing by 35 points in South Carolina. Where does this race stand at this moment by your lights?
Well, there's plenty of room for Nikki Haley to grow. That's not good news, though. That's not a good news story for her at all. And I've talked to pollsters and people on the ground in South Carolina who believe this race could tighten to 12 to 10 points, which would be a lot of ground gathered by Nikki Haley in the last couple of weeks. But again, finishing consistently 10 to 12 points behind doesn't make you competitive. It makes you more interesting. It may help you raise more money, but it doesn't make you competitive. You've got to get delegates, and you're not going to get delegates finishing a distant second.
Major Garrett in Washington. Thank you, Major.